Hey y'all, welcome back. We are almost halfway through the year, which means that it's time for the mid-year freakout tag, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a tag that asks a bunch of questions that encourage us to think back on our reading for the first half of the year, think about the best things we've read, the worst things we've read, what we still have yet to read that we want to get to. And I love doing this every year. I think it's a really great kind of check-in moment for the first half of the year, and since we're now at the end of June, it is time for it once again, and I'm very excited. So diving in, the first question is, what's the best book you've read so far in 2024? And I struggled to pick one book for this, so I have actually grabbed two because I think they're both books that have really lingered with me and that I'm still thinking about a lot and I think are just really interesting for different reasons. The first of the two is The Mysterious Case of the Alberton Angels by Janice Hallett, which is a mixed media mystery about a journalist who is trying to basically look into this mass death that happened like 20 years ago with a cult that appears to have committed suicide, and there is a baby involved that has gone missing, but the baby is now an adult, and so she's looking for that baby, trying to see if she can get like their perspective on it. At the same time, a rival journalist who she has a history with is also looking for the baby, and they end up needing to work together to try and figure out what happened that day. And this was just really interesting. It had a bunch of twists and turns that I didn't see coming. I thought the clues were laid out really well, and I thought that it was really interesting that it kind of zeroed in on a cult. I haven't read like a mixed media mystery with a cult in it before, and I just really felt like the different types of mixed media elements were used to great effect in here, and the way that all of the clues were just laid out, where you could absolutely solve this on your own. And there were definitely some pieces of it that I did figure out for myself, which was just so satisfying. And I really think the ending of this is impactful. It's really intense, and there's a really interesting like relationship development that happens throughout the course of this between these two journalists. We can start to find out a little bit about their history together, and it just was such a fun read, and it talks a lot about like what does justice really mean, and it also talks about like our vulnerability to being misled, even if we think we're not vulnerable to it, and especially actually when we think that we're not vulnerable to it, like the ways that we can be misled even when we think we are the like most skeptical, safest person in the world. So I thought that was just really interesting, and I definitely am looking forward to whatever Janice Hallett is writing next. The other one that I've read that I think I enjoyed just as much is The Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe, which I've just read this one. I just finished it like a week ago, I think, but I've been thinking about it every day since then, and I love these characters so much. It's such an interesting world. This is about Tarquin and Nyra. Tarquin is the heir to a galactic like business empire family, and he is on this mission to basically prove that his family is not responsible for this ecosystem collapse issue that's happening across all of the different planets that they have mined resources on. Meanwhile, Nyra is basically an eco-terrorist who is trying to prevent the mission that Tarquin is on from happening. She has previously testified that they are causing the ecosystem collapse that they've been witnessing across all of these different planets. And so the two of them end up at odds when they crash land on a dead planet. They arrive where the mission is supposed to be happening, something goes horribly wrong, ship crashes, and the planet's already dead. So now they need to really figure out what actually happened, what's causing the ecosystem collapse, how does his family tie into things, and how are they going to get off the planet. I just thought this was so fun and interesting. There's a lot of interesting technology in this. This is set in a world where people can like reprint their bodies if they die. Their minds are like backed up into a computer network, and then they can be just reprinted if they die. But there is a risk of cracking. If you die a violent death, your mind might just break and you can never be reprinted after that. So there's that kind of technology going on. And then it's a lot also about like humanity's survival and how humanity has dealt with basically living on space stations and having to leave a dying planet. And I just think it's super interesting. There's a lot of really great politics in here. There is a romance in here that I thought was really, really well done and just really got me right in the heart. It was so good, and I think it's bittersweet in a really fascinating way. Just, I loved everything about this. I was so obsessed with this. I went out and bought book 2, which I'm planning to read next month, and I'm really excited to continue with the series, which the finale is coming out at the end of this month, at the end of June, so I'm very excited about that as well. Question number 2 is, what is the best sequel you've read so far in 2024? And while I'm reading that, I've just realized that my camera is slightly tilted. It's fine, we're not gonna worry about it. We're not gonna worry about it too much. Anyway, best sequel you've read so far in 2024, and I've only read like 3 sequels. 2 of them were manga, And the one I'm talking about is a manga sequel, because I've got Phantom Tales of the Night Volume 2. Again, I haven't read very many sequels this year, but this one definitely stands out as the best of the 3 that I've read. This one basically builds upon some of the storylines we get introduced to in the first volume. This is about this guy, the innkeeper, who is here on the cover, who runs an inn where you can stay, but the cost isn't money, it's your darkest secret, and he collects secrets. It's unclear like what kind of entity he is or why he's doing this, but we get introduced to him in the first book and also get introduced to somebody who is like hunting him, and there's like a series of small vignettes of things that he goes through, and we start to find out about like what he's been up to across his probably very long lifetime. Volume 2 here starts to introduce some of the backstories and motivations for his 2 sidekicks, Butterfly and Spider, so we start to learn a lot more about them, and there is a massive twist at the end of the last of the stories in here that ties things together in a super interesting way with Volume 1, and I am just so excited to continue with this series. It's just really fascinating. It's a horror series. I think it is really creepy, and some of the visuals are really disturbing, but I'm mostly just really interested to find out more about this like rivalry that the innkeeper has going with this guy who is, I think, as of yet unnamed. I don't remember his name if he has one, but there's just like this interesting rivalry happening. Clearly this is like a generations long feud, and I'm super intrigued to see what's going to happen next in this series. Question number 3 is, what is a new release you haven't read yet but want to? And I picked one that I bought fairly recently, which is Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina. I think this came out in April, but this one is a horror story about a young woman who is about to move off the reservation she was raised on with her boyfriend, except he dies suddenly, leaving her to pick up the pieces. And around the same time, her beloved uncle, who left 10 years earlier, shows back up on the reservation and is like, something is off here, something is going on, and so they're working together to investigate because something is happening that's causing a lot of people to die in really mysterious and disturbing ways, and it seems like there's something sinister lurking on the reservation. So it just sounds super interesting. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of like family dynamic stuff and like secrets from the past, and I just think it sounds so cool. And I've heard great things about Nick Medina's first book, which is Sisters of the Lost Nation, I believe, and this one just sounded super interesting. I think the premise of this one was more interesting to me, and I'm so excited to give this one a chance. I read a couple of pages before I bought it, and the writing is immediately really cool, so I'm just very excited about this. And it's, I think, of the ones I've gotten so far this year that were new this year, that weren't like backlist titles, I think this is the one that I am most wanting to prioritize reading. Question number 4 is, what is an anticipated release for the second half of the year, or rather most anticipated release for the second half of the year? This was another one where I couldn't narrow it down to one, so I have chosen 3. These are all books from some of my favorite authors that I'm just like really excited that we're getting new titles from them this year. So in July, we're getting I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones, which is a slasher from the killer's point of view. That sounds super fun, and I love slashers during the summer. Summer is very much a horror season to me, so I'm very much looking forward to that and picking it up as soon as it comes out. And then in August, we're getting The Seventh Veil of Salome by Sylvia Morena Garcia, which is a historical book. I'm unclear if it's maybe like, you know, blend of genres. I just know it's historical. It's set in 1950s Mexico in the Mexican film industry, and it's following these 2 actresses, one of whom lands a really important role as Salome in an upcoming movie, and another actress who is really envious of her and wants that role for herself. It sounds like it's going to be pretty twisty and probably kind of dark, and I'm just very excited to see what she's going to do with this, because her previous book was also about the film industry in Mexico, and I think that one was in the 90s, or maybe the 80s, so I'm curious to see how she's going to like work that aspect into this book as well. And then the last one I want to mention is Swordcrest by Freya Marsk, which I think is coming out in October. I don't remember the exact date for this one, but this is queer historical fantasy romance, and I love The Last Binding. It's so fun. I've read the first book. It's one of my all-time favorite books. I'm currently reading the second book. I love Freya Marsk's writing, and I'm so excited for her next series. I think it's the start of a series. It's either a standalone or the start of a new series. I don't actually remember, but I will basically pick up anything she wants to write forever. Question number 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment so far this year? And I have 2 that I want to mention that are disappointments for very different reasons. The first one is, I think, more of a traditional disappointment, a book I expected to really like and didn't like as much as I thought, which is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I didn't dislike this book, I gave it 3 stars, but I have loved every other horror book I've read from T. Kingfisher, and I just kind of liked this one okay. I liked the characters a lot, I really liked their friendship, but the particular kind of horror and the way that it was structured in the first half of the book just didn't really work for me, so this one was really sad for me because I really love her writing, and I was bummed that I didn't like this as much as I thought I was going to. The other disappointment I have to mention is one that I expected to be bad, but it was far, far worse than I anticipated, and this was Gothicana by Runix. This was recently picked up by Bramble. I think it came out at the beginning of the year. And this one was previously indie published, but it has a pretty big following from what I can tell. It has lots of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it sounded not great to me, and then I read it and it was awful. I did do a video where I did a full like spoiler, I read it so you don't have to kind of a thing. I'll link that in case you want to check it out, but I hated this book immensely. This is supposed to be a romance and like a dark mystery and a kind of dark academia kind of a thing. What it actually is a really depressing story about a young vulnerable woman being taken advantage of and stalked and mistreated and abused by somebody who has power over her, and her thinking it's romantic because she has no form of like reference or point of reference for what like a healthy relationship looks like. And I just found it super depressing. It was not like bad in a fun, entertaining way. It was bad in a this is just kind of sad and I feel really bad for this main character kind of a way. So I was massively disappointed by this. I thought it would at least be like a fun read, but it was one of the worst books I have ever read. Number 6 is Biggest Surprise though, so we get to go on a more positive note and talk about Zomfam by Kamala Mackerel, which is a poetry collection, which is surprising to me only because I'm not usually a poetry person. I don't typically like poetry all that much, but I did really enjoy this collection, and this one was fun because I read this for a class, so the discussion that we had around it was really interesting, but also the author came to campus while I was taking classes still, earlier in the spring before I graduated, and I got to go hear them speak, and that was just super interesting. They had a lot of cool things to say. They're like a visual artist and an activist and obviously a writer, and they just had a lot of interesting things to say about their art and kind of the process of writing this. And I believe it was actually a stage performance first that then got turned into a book, so just kind of learning about that was really cool. But the actual poetry is beautiful. They use some interesting things with like spacing and negative space in like the formatting. They're also really interested in like craft, so there's a lot of like language around craft and crafting, so it's just really interesting, and it's also like an exploration of their experience growing up trans and like that experience of coming out to their family, which just was really emotional. This book definitely made me cry in like a cathartic kind of way, just like the way that everything comes full circle. You have this building emotion through it, and the way that things come together at the end was just really beautiful, and it's such an interesting poetry collection, and I highly recommend it. Question number 7 is your favorite new author, either a debut author or a new to you author, and we're picking up The Blighted Stars again because it's Megan E. O'Keefe for me. Like I said, I'm totally obsessed with this book, and I've gone out and bought book 2, and I'm hoping to read that very soon. I just love the way that she writes her characters. I think the world that she's come up with is really interesting. My computer just went off, which is a problem. Get that to come back up. My list is on there. Yeah, so I love everything about this book, and I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. And the next question, I'm also going to be holding this up because next one is newest fictional crush, and I don't typically have fictional crushes generally, but if I had to pick one of all of the characters I've read this year, Tarquin Mercator. He's just a funky little nerd who really likes rocks and geology, and I enjoyed reading about him. He's like a golden retriever. He's super sweet. He cares so much about other people, and he's very intelligent. He's also very like flexible and adaptable, and he just rolls with the punches throughout the book, and I just think he's such an interesting character, and he's just so sweet. Like, it's hard not to like him. He's just a nice guy, and I really enjoyed reading about him, and I'm looking forward to his further adventures. The next question is similar, and this is your newest favorite character, and I have a twofer for this as well, but not from different books. They're from the same book. It's a duo, and it's Dinios Cole and Ana Delabra from The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, which was a release that came out fairly early this year, like January or February. But this is a kind of Holmes and Watson style duo. Dinios is like the Watson character, and Ana is the Holmes character, but they work together to solve a mystery involving like a dead ambassador in this book, and I just really enjoyed the way that these two characters interacted. I think they're both really interesting, but I in particular really like Dinios. He is really like intelligent, but he doubts himself a lot because of his past with like getting really bad exam scores, and he really struggled to get a placement in the ministry, but now he's working as a UDEX investigator, actually like an apprentice investigator or assistant investigator. I can't remember the exact job title, but he had to work really hard to get that. I think there's some suggestion that he may have had to cheat to actually pass the test, but he's really good at what he does, and he's just like a really kind person, but he doubts himself so much. He also has dyslexia, which I thought was interesting, so there's various points where he's supposed to like memorize things that he's seen. That's his job, is he has this like mutation that allows him to remember everything he sees or reads or hears or smells, and so he's memorizing things, but he's dyslexic, and so when he needs to memorize books and things, he'll like take them and go elsewhere and like read them out loud to himself slowly so that he can actually take in that information. So I thought that the way that he worked around that was really interesting, and I just think he's such a fun character, and the relationship he has with Anna is so interesting because there's clearly a lot of like frustration because she's very eccentric and very kind of like self-interested, but they have this like growing respect between the two of them where clearly they each care about how the other is feeling and how the other is doing, and it's just this kind of like snarky relationship, but it's built on like mutual respect and care, which I just thought was really interesting, and I just love both of them so much, and I'm really looking forward to future installments in the series. Questions 10 and 11 I'm actually going to talk about together because my answer for both of them is the same. I forgot to scroll down my list, so now I can see it again. So 10 and 11, I have the same answer for both of them, and that is a book that made you cry and a book that made you happy. And I want to say The God and the Gumiho by Sophie Kim, which I just finished yesterday actually. This was the one that I had as an ARC, but it is a fantasy romance set in Korea in like the 1990s. And it's following Seokga the Fallen, who is a trickster god who was kicked out of heaven for a coup. He was like, let me just take my brother's throne, it's fine. And then he got kicked out of heaven, and he's paying the price for that. That's happening for him. And then Hani is a Gumiho who happens to be this infamous Gumiho called the Scarlet Fox, who is the reason that like eating people's livers and souls is illegal in this world. It's all because of her. And so the two of them end up working together when he is told that if he kills the Scarlet Fox and a specific demon that is like terrorizing the city, he will immediately become a god again, but she wants to prevent him from figuring out that she's the Scarlet Fox, so she becomes his assistant and is like helping with his investigations and kind of trying to guide him away from her trail that she's left. So I really enjoyed this. I think it's really silly, so it made me happy because it's very silly and very like tropey and fun, and it's just not taking itself too seriously. It's like, hey, let's go do this thing, not because it makes sense, but because it's fun. And then it just like really committed to that tone in a way that I thought was really entertaining, and I was just like smiling and giggling all the way through this book. The banter is really funny, the characters themselves are really funny, they get into all kinds of funny situations, and it just made me happy the whole time I was reading it. And I really liked the way that the romance between them developed, and the way that that kind of brought out the best of both of them. I just really enjoyed that part of it. And then it made me cry as well because there was this really sweet like relationship that had formed, and the end is like really angsty and dramatic in a way that I found exciting, and just it was so good. I don't love the epilogue. I could have done without the epilogue, but like right up until that point, angsty, dramatic, perfect. Had a great time reading it, and it definitely did make me cry. The penultimate question is, what is the most beautiful book you've bought so far or received this year? Bought or received so far this year. That's the correct order of words. And I've gone with the Evernight edition of Murder Road by Simone St. James. I haven't read anything from her yet, but this one I'm very excited for. It sounds really fun. It's about a couple who are traveling to go on their honeymoon, except that they end up taking a wrong turn and end up in this small town. They pick up a hitchhiker who is injured. She dies in the hospital, and they become prime suspects in a murder investigation. Sounds like it's going to be a little bit supernatural and probably quite twisty, so I'm very excited for it. But I just love this cover, this version of it. It's got these cool illustrations. There's like pink, and then trees, and the inside has some cool end papers with artwork on it. I just think it's a beautiful edition, and it really makes me think of like the old Nancy Drew books, which I loved when I was a kid, so I'm just like so excited for this. And it's definitely at least partially due to the cover reminding me of something that I loved when I was a kid, because I just think it's such a neat cover and has that kind of like Nancy Drew vibe. The very last question is, what are some books you need to read by the end of the year? And I actually have, I think about half or a little more than half of my self-destructing books list left for the year. I'll link that somewhere if you want to go check it out. I made a list of books that if I don't read them by, I think it's December, like the end of December, I need to unhaul them. So I have a few on there that I am particularly interested in prioritizing and trying to get to them before that time runs out. So I have like 4 out of 12. I've read, or no, I DNF'd 1, I've unhauled 3, so I've dealt with 4 so far, and I have 4 here that I still feel very strongly about getting to. First one is A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. This one is more like I want to know, because my best friend read this and she hated it, and she regularly goes on rants about it, so I feel like I need to read it, and she's asked me to read it, so we can talk about it and actually have like a full conversation. So I'm not like excited about reading this, but I feel like I need to read it to like know how I feel about it. And then I have The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, which is, I think, just suffered from me trying to read it while I was in a slump. I was trying to work on a project that I ended up dropping because I just could not focus on anything at the time, but I was slumping really hard and I don't think I gave this enough of a chance, so I want to go back and retry it. And I know a lot of people like Grady Hendrix. I also know this is not typically people's favorite book of his, so I don't know if this is a great place to start, but it is the one that I have already started, so I feel like I need to finish this one before I move on to some of his other books. And then these last 2 are both books that I bought at local bookstores. They're local authors, and I just feel like I need to give them a try before I DNF them, or sorry, not DNF, unhaul them. First one being The Salt Line by Holly Goddard Jones, which is a like post-apocalyptic story about some people who are living in a world where there's like killer ticks, and all of civilization lives within what's called the salt line, which keeps out the killer ticks. But there's a group of people who are like extreme tourists who go beyond the salt line and end up, I think, being captured by raiders or something, and it's about like what they're willing to do to get back within the salt line. Sounds very intense. Having trouble getting past the killer ticks thing to read it, but I do want to give it a shot at some point. And then the other one is A Shadow All of Light by Fred Chappell, which is a fantasy story. I think, get the sense it's kind of like a series of vignettes, but it's about this guy named Falco who moves to the city and becomes an apprentice shadow thief. He's literally stealing people's shadows because shadows have power in this world, and it sounds like it's like a series of stories of things that he got up to while he was acting as a shadow thief. So those are all the books I feel like I really most need to prioritize before the end of the year. And that is all of the questions. So I would love to know your answer to some of these questions. Let me know down in the comments below whichever ones are speaking to you. I'd love to know your answers. And I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving me a like, maybe even subscribe to see what happens next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.